Good afternoon, everyone. We are just waiting for some participants to join in. So in 3 minutes, like around 12:35, we will start. Thank you for waiting. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our virtual webinar on child protection, the role of nurturing community, organized by Noor Rehabilitation and Welfare Association for People of Determination. This session would give us greater understanding and awareness of protecting and promoting healthy child development. So I would like to thank you all for joining us. And before anything else, please allow me to introduce myself. I'm Jill Ann Tajanera, special educator by profession. I've been in the field for 16 years now, and I'm currently holding the position of program coordinator here in Noor. So I will be your moderator for today. So before we start off, just a few house rules that I'd like to inform you all. We request everyone to please treat this as a formal event and participate in the appropriate manner. Audio and video features are muted, and you can also post your questions in the question and answer box and comments in the chat box. Okay. There will be a question and answer session at the end, and at that time, your questions will be relayed and addressed by our experts. A feedback link will be posted at the end of the webinar in the chat box, and email will be sent to the attendees. E-certificate will be sent to the participants' registered mail upon completion of the feedback. And please do note the e-certificate will take 3 working days to reach you. So our discussion features a distinguished panel with me here. All of them are experts in the field. Each of them will be shedding light to our understanding on child protection and the role that each has to play for our children to experience and grow in a safe and nurturing environment. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our panelists. Let's start with Miss Tracy Jane Fountain. Ms. Tracy is a child welfare senior specialist in Abu Dhabi Early Childhood Authority. She has vast experience in child protection, child injury prevention, early years, family support and advocacy, and domestic staff, parent awareness and education, to name a few. She had authored the UAE's Child Protection Reference Guide commissioned by the UAE Ministry of Interior, also provided Abu Dhabi Social Support Department with a needs analysis on child and early childhood support, in collaboration with the UK's leading family support charity, Home Start. She achieved recognition at the Abu Dhabi Annual Awards by developing and implementing a Train the Trainer program for domestic staff and parental training in child injury prevention for the Health Authority in Abu Dhabi. Welcome, Ms. Tracy. And also we have here Mr. Saji Thomas. Mr. Saji has over 20 years experience working on human rights, and child protection. Since January 2017, he worked as Chief Child Protection in Egypt, providing leadership in child protection systems, strengthening and supported putting in place a cross-sectoral approach to ending violence against children. He completes 15 years with UNICEF this year. A journey that started in India included a move to Sri Lanka, UNICEF headquarters in New York, and Egypt. In headquarters, he served as the global focal person for mental health and psychosocial support for 5 years and provided leadership in the development of many global guidance. While at the headquarters, he also served as a co-chair in the Interagency Standing Committee Reference Group on Mental Health and Psychosocial Support. We're honored with your presence, Mr. Saji. Thank you. And next we have Ms. Tanuka Gupta. Ms. Tanuka has 26 years of experience as clinical psychologist, and her areas of expertise include administering psychological assessments, behavior management, emotional skills, training of children, and positive parenting training. Ms. Tanuka works with families of children with developmental disabilities at here at Noor, encouraging their well-being through compassion-focused therapy. She also provides awareness training to parents and caregivers regarding emotional health of the children with developmental disabilities. Thank you for being with us here today, Ms. Tanuka. And finally, we have Ms. Anita Sunil. Ms. Anita is a clinical psychologist who has been serving society for the past 27 years. She is currently in her 10th year as consultant and therapist for victims of domestic violence, human trafficking, and child abuse at Dubai Foundation for Women and Children. She is passionate and dedicated to reach out to women, children, and families in distress, helping them rebuild their lives meaningfully. She has participated and represented UAE in national and international conferences, presenting and contributing to best practice methods of intervention to support women and children who undergo violence and abuse. Good afternoon, Ms. Anita, and thank you for accepting our invite. And so there you have it, our panelists for today. I really have to say that I'm greatly honored to be sharing this platform with you all. And so to get us started, most of us here are aware that when we talk about child protection, we would have thoughts around safeguarding our children from harm. And by saying the word harm, what exactly do we mean by them since it is interpreted differently by different people? So I would like to start by asking Ms. Tracy if you can explain to us what is child protection and help us understand it more fully.
Thank you, Jill. It's an honour to be here. It's a privilege. So child protection is when we refer to the detection and the response to children who are generally either already experiencing some form of maltreatment abuse, or they're likely to suffer significant harm to the point where they then enter the child protection system. When they enter a child protection system, this is really where they get access to certain services, treatments and rehabilitation. But it's also an opportunity for the investigation to take place, which can then ultimately lead to a prosecution. There's also a term called safeguarding, which many people may have heard. And really, child protection is part of the safeguarding process, but it's more of a holistic approach to preventing a child from being harmed in the first place. So it's really all about the efforts that are taking place by organisations, governments, etc., to prevent abuse from happening in the first place, to give the child the best outcome in life. So child protection is more about how we respond to maltreatment. Safeguarding is more about all the efforts that are put in place to prevent maltreatment from happening in the first place.
Okay. Miss Tracy, like you've mentioned about abuse, and I believe there are different forms of abuse. If you could elaborate more in that.
Yeah, we generally refer to 5 main categories of violence against children, which are intentional acts of harm to a child. We refer to physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect of a child, emotional psychological abuse, and also various types of exploitation. In the context of children of determination, they can be considered almost at 4 times greater risk from abuse than children without additional needs. And children of determination could be more vulnerable in this context because they may have additional communication needs or multiple needs. Maybe they don't understand what's happening to them. You know, if it's sexual abuse, for example, and often they're more dependent on adults, especially if they're dependent for their intimate care. Often abuse doesn't appear in isolation. You could have potentially, let's say, psychological, emotional abuse and exploitation. You may have neglect and physical abuse taking place. But it's also important to consider the impact if the abusers are a parent or caregiver, because a majority of abuses actually happen within the family. So if we look at physical abuse, you know, a child can recover quite quickly from a physical injury. If a child's climbing a tree and they fall from a tree and they break their leg, they'll go through a process with the healthcare and the support and nurture of their parents to get through that physical injury and forget about it. If that injury, if that broken leg has been inflicted by the person they trust and rely on, then the emotional impact is much greater.
Right. Okay. Also, Miss Tracy, are there certain signs and symptoms which something that we could flag, something that we could watch out for our audience to know that like usually, as you have mentioned, for physical abuse, it may be like the signs is visible, but what about in other forms of abuse?
Yeah, I mean, it may not always be visible, even with physical abuse. You know, physical abuse can be in many forms. You know, it could be from hitting a child with an object, punching a child, burning with a cigarette. It could be over medicating a child. It could be in many forms, but it could be disguised. You know, if this has been inflicted in the home, a child could go to a school and it could be, say, the middle of summer, but suddenly they're wearing long sleeves jumpers. They could be covering up injuries so as not to be detected. There could be an explanation that doesn't match the injury. For example, you know, if a child is, say, confined to a wheelchair, but they have injuries to maybe a shin, which you perhaps expect if a child was playing football, but doesn't match the explanation. So there is, you know, it's not always visible, but there are sometimes subtle signs that may appear over time that you would need to look out for. You know, for example, if a 9-year-old child turns up at a clinic and is diagnosed with a sexually transmitted disease, you know, there is a red flag. Or you could be caring for a child in the early years, and you know there is signs of perhaps blood on their underwear if they're having any support with intimate care. Or it could be even a teenager that has a sudden change in behaviour, or the signs of self-harm. You know, or they become withdrawn, or they run away. You know, so there's lots of subtle signs, and often these signs appear over time, you know, and not all at once. So it's really about sort of building a jigsaw puzzle, you know, to gather these different signs, and using other colleagues. Very important to you know, discuss with family members, you know, have you noticed something different? Or if you're in a school environment, to talk to colleagues, and to involve everybody in the process, and to have policies in place that even if a child is on the bus every day and suddenly displaying different types of behaviour, that somebody, you know, who is an assistant or driver on that bus notices it and has an opportunity within that system then to report it to somebody else so that it doesn't go undetected. And these are little signs then can build up to having a suspicion that maltreatment could be taking place.
Right. Very true. You have mentioned the importance of detecting the signs of abuse, and you're also like talking about our children of determination. We would like to, if you could, shed light more on, like how they are more vulnerable to abuse. Like we would like to understand that.
Well, as I mentioned before, it's well documented that children of determination can be almost 4 times greater risk from abuse than those without additional needs. They generally become into more contact with people on a daily basis. The majority of children, from domestic workers to drivers to therapists, teachers, nurses, etc. So there's an increase in contact. Children that have communicative challenges may not be able to vocalize any concerns or abuse that they want to vocalize if they're not offered alternative methods of communication. At times, professionals may overlook certain signs of abuse and they put it down to a condition that a child has rather than exploring it. There's also practitioners or teachers that work with families for a long time and develop relationships with the families, see the challenges and the struggles that families go through, and then might overlook reporting because they take pity on the family and think, well, if I report it, then it's going to cause more problems for the family. The father might lose his job, and all these things go through their head. So they're prevented. They stop themselves from disclosing abuse. And there's also a lot of myths, around abuse and children of determination, especially when it comes to sexual abuse, that people of determination not being considered as sexual beings, and therefore, well, they surely wouldn't be sexually abused. But of course, that's, as we know, and evidence suggests that's not true. So I guess, when it comes to families supporting children of determination, sometimes for people it's too hard to comprehend. So it's just easier not to think about it, and therefore they don't report it.
Right, right. Wow, very informative. Thank you, Ms. Tracy. Now, there are a lot of articles being published regarding issues on children more vulnerable to abuse, as we are discussing right now. Knowing that this could significantly alert us to offer support. Miss Anita, can you share with us like what are those risk factors that contribute to child abuse?
Thank you, Jill. The risk factors usually we often see on a day-to-day basis comes in as a combination of the individual, family, as well as the community. And it doesn't have to be a direct or an indirect cause we have seen most of the times, but it's so important for us professionals who are working towards protecting children and working towards family stability to understand, or the caregivers as such, to understand these risk factors, because they are like characteristics which help us identify and plan a proper intervention at large for the children when they are approaching us for support. So when you talk about the individual factors, I've often found that the lower category age group of the child, like below 4 years, is one of the major risk factors. And as Tracy mentioned, the child having special needs or having disabilities or having some physical condition abnormalities could also be a great risk factor when it comes to being more vulnerable to abuse as such. And we've also seen on a daily basis at the work environment here as well that the family poses a lot of risk when it comes to the familial factors, where there is lack of proper bonding with the child, where we have a young mother who lacks understanding of how to take care of the child, poor parenting skills, which we see most of the time in disrupted families, high family stressors within their environment, lack of parental understanding about the developmental needs of the child or over expectation of the child, lack of proper support within the family when you have non-biological parents or non-biological family members within the family residing with the child or children as such. And we also find that in relationships when there's domestic violence, which we see at a large extent here, there is a lot of risk associated when we get to meet these kids who witness these violence or abuse forms on a regular basis within their households or within the family, where we believe that the family is the most safe environment for children. So these are major risks which we often look at when we look at how to protect children from child abuse, and looking at even misusing use of drugs within the parental circle or within the family. These are all high risks which children usually face in their most safe environment. Looking at the community risk factors, we go on to understand that the school starts with it. So it's lack of resources in schools, the structure, the support system within schools, which doesn't help these children, put them at more risk, especially in the case of adolescents. And we also find that in when the community is concerned, it is the other conditions existing at the national level which the child or the family can be at threat, where there's war or there's poverty or lack of employment facilities. And we've also seen this happening in single mothers who are in severe family stresses and trying to make both ends meet when they have to parent a child. Now, as I have experienced here when you work with such family situations and when we work with family mediations, protecting children who are vulnerable to abuse, it is very important for us, I think, to understand also that it's the social and cultural context which we need to take into consideration when we look at the risk factors for child abuse. So it's us professionals who also need to support the family as well as throw light to various risk factors and understand the nature when we are trying to provide the intervention.
Right. And I think from what you've shared to us, like it goes around circling it to family well-being and the community as well.
Yes.
Um, yeah. So I would like to ask Mr. Saji. I know there's a lot of thinking, linking mental health and psychosocial well-being, and then the violence against the children. So, like, it shows that these two are interrelated. So, I would like to ask, what is the emerging perspective of the UNICEF in to work together, like child abuse, violence against children, and its impact on mental health and psychosocial well-being.
Thank you, Jill. And
Mr. Saji?
yeah, can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes. Now we can hear you
Yeah.
better.
Yeah. No. First of all, thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and very good to see, platforms and discussions like this. So you asked me about the perspective on violence against children and mental health and psychosocial well-being. And it's a very relevant question because just as we speak, our new strategy for child protection 2021 to 2030, is being developed. And probably for the first time, we have a specific section on mental health and psychosocial well-being being mainstreamed into all our child protection work. So there is, merging between those two domains of work. It's not rocket science, and I think a lot of us know that these two domains are interrelated. But I think what is interesting is of late there is a lot of evidence that is coming to light. Yeah, so there's a lot of data that tells you that children are introduced to violence at a very young age, and either referred to it even before 3 years old. I mean, I think some data from Bangladesh shows over 70% of violence happens when, even before they are 3 years old. The data from Vietnam showed that up to 50% of abuse happens before they are 3 years old. So, first of all, it happens at a very early age, and it's a routine experience. So, that's the other thing. I mean, it's nothing new, but how routine it is, how it is part of everyday life of a lot of us, a lot of the communities is the other striking factor. And we also know that childhood at all stages, but especially early years, is a time of development, right? Emotional and social development. And this brain damage can have long-lasting impact on their, well-being. So that's the other fact where we have strong evidence. They do brain mappings and they tell you how violence in early years is impacting in their well-being, later in life. So there is clear evidence, which means we have to marry these two domains of work, and that's where we are focusing a lot these days. And there are approaches that we adapt for both for ending violence against children and ending psychosocial support that I can go into details a bit later. But just to say that of late, especially now, we look at these two domains and we see how these two can be integrated. And especially in a country like UAE, we also see that there's a lot of interest on an issue like mental health and psychosocial well-being. So that becomes an opportunity for us to address violence against children as well in the long run. But I'll stop there for now.
Yeah, actually, that leads to my other question, also, Mr. Saji, that you've mentioned about a country like UAE. How do different countries respond to these certain issues?
All right. So, I was in Egypt for about 4 years. So, I'm obsessed with pyramids. But just to say that in both psychosocial support, mental health and psychosocial support, and ending violence against children, we often refer to a pyramid of responses. I mean, if you are aware of the interagency guidelines on mental health and psychosocial support, the first thing that you remember is there is a pyramid. There are different layers of intervention. So whether it is UAE or any other country, similar or comparable context, we look at 3 or 4 layers of intervention. And let me start with the bottommost layer. At the bottom is basically about awareness raising, community mobilization, making services available. Yeah, so there is the vast majority of people need, there's a lot of work that we need to do in terms of awareness raising, mobilizing communities to support each other, and making services available. The second layer is where we see the need for social networks, empowerment, and things like safe education. So there's a lot of focus on creating platforms for community to, integrate peer-to-peer support for adolescent girls and boys, platforms for women and community members to come together. So that becomes the second layer in which there is a little more focused support. And then there is this third layer where there is a lot more focused response. So we talk about things like, parenting support, specific support to families, in vulnerable settings. And if you refer to psychosocial support and mental health, you refer to tools like psychological first aid. You can have very simple tools and approaches like psychological first aid, which if you use and apply, a lot of people can respond to both emotional and issues related to violence against children. And on top of the pyramid is where we refer to specialized and rehabilitative services. So a lot of the work that we do in child protection systems come into play there. I know that Tracy and the Early Childhood Authority and a lot of the entities here work on case management. So you need specific case management support. And it can also refer to mental health. That in a small percentage of cases, you need psychologists and psychiatrists, and social workers coming into play. But you also know that it's only a small percentage. In a universe of cases, we only need this rehabilitative and specialized services in up to 3 to 5% of the cases. So the vast majority can do without. So the last layer on top of the pyramid is where specialized services and specialized mental health comes in. If it is child protection, it will be specialized child protection and case management services. And if it is mental health and psychosocial well-being, it will be intervention by psychologists, psychiatrists, and specialized professionals. I'll stop there. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. We have you have mentioned regarding supports and all, but before I move into that, just a while back, Miss Tracy had explained about emotional abuse. I am in understanding that with emotional abuse, it compromises the child's emotional safety. So, Ms. Tanuka, can you share with us more about what does emotional safety mean and how does it impact the development of the child?
Yes. Thank you, Jill, and thank you to all the panelists. I'm really, learning from all your contributions and sharings. So, when we are talking about emotional safety, let us just look at safety first. So, the sense of safety is hardwired in us from the time we are conceived in the womb. So people usually understand the physical safety, of a pregnant mother and the child is being nurtured. So people understand that. But what happens when the child is born? How do we ensure the safety of the child? And then again and again, we are more focused on the physical safety of the child, of the infant. But what about the emotional safety of the infant? It is same and extremely important and crucial as much as the physical safety. So emotional safety, just like physical safety, is where the individual feels free or safe to express themselves or to be themselves in that environment. So when we talk about abuse, we are looking at as caregivers and parents, probably we're thinking of, okay, I'm not physically abusing the child, I'm not kind of endangering them in the ways that are very extreme, like violence, physical violence. But what about, am I providing a safe environment for the child to express themselves? So we are looking at a wider range of population and probably a subtler signs of parenting, caregiving, where the questions of, say, for example, how am I talking to the child? Is my loud tone of the voice, scaring the child? And I may not realize this. So, emotional safety is a topic where caregivers need to review the way they are interacting with the child. And eventually, over a period of time, how safe is the child feeling? Because there may not be any overt signs of being abused in those terms. So that's where the emotional safety comes in, and it's hardwired in us. We all need to feel safe to be and to express ourselves. So some of the examples would be like, as I said, a constant loud voice, or maybe there's a lot of bickering, argument going on in the environment, not directly to the child, but amongst adults. It could be constant complaining of the child. Often, we have dealt with parents and caregivers who are saying, oh, he's lazy, he doesn't do this, he can do this, but he chooses not to do it. So complaining in front of the child, or when probably the child comes back from the school, they are not interacting with the child, maybe physically taking care of them, but not interacting with them. We can also see when, it is feeding time and the child doesn't want to eat that kind of food, and then there's force feeding going on, or the physical handling of the child, how you're taking the child out of the chair and putting them in. So all these things are very subtle and may not really come across as something which is very abusive, but leads to an unsafe environment for the child, may lead to an unsafe environment for the child. So how does it impact the child? It would definitely, what other panelists have been talking about, leading to mental health and social health, difficulties. And also there are neurological impacts, which on a continuous basis, if these kind of handling of the child go on, they can lead to maybe cognitive decline, maybe difficulties in sustaining attention in their academic work, and a lot of executive functions are affected. For example, memory. The child may develop a habit of forgetting things, although they may seem pretty bright and alert and aware. So yeah, this is what I wanted to speak about emotional safety, which I think covers a wide range of people, where we need to review what kind of environment we are providing for our children.
Right. I think like for us, it becomes like a time for us to reflect of do we do that because most of the time like we are not aware or we don't intend to do it, but it had actually affected the child already. So, Ms. Tanuka, just a follow-up question, like how can we ensure that the emotional safety of the child, like at home and in school?
Okay. So as you could see that the examples that I've given is a very daily kind of interaction with the child. So some of the things, see the foundation of providing emotional safety is the kind of vibes that we are actually sending to our children, the kind of the bond or the connection that we have with our children. So it's not only the physical caretaking of the child that I'm providing a house, the health and hygiene. It's not only that, it goes beyond that. It's basically, it boils down to the connection that we have with the child as a teacher, as an educator, or as a parent or a caregiver. So I can give you some examples for like in order to provide a sense of physical safety and then eventually emotional safety, physical hugs, eye contact, going down to their level and talking to them and saying, using phrases genuinely, like I trust you, I'm really proud of you, I love you. And it may seem like not much, but then when we reflect, many caregivers would say, I don't do this on a regular basis, on a daily basis. And how important is that? To give verbal and physical assurance to the child that you're loved, you belong here, I care about you. Or checking our own irritations and emotional deficits, like, are we expressive? Are we emotionally distant? Or, as parents or caregivers, are we able to connect to the child? Are we warm in our emotional expressions? Do we lose our cool very fast? Are we moody or unpredictable? So the child actually depends on whether we are in a good mood or not, as you know, and they kind of gauge if my parent or my teacher is in a good mood, then I'm going to express myself. Then the other ways is to give children the freedom to choose from simple things like food, clothes, and then it evolves into choosing activities or choosing their, as they grow older, we give them opportunities to choose what kind of work placement that they would like, when they're really old. So the freedom to choose and the freedom to fail, so not to be disturbed by their failures and their inabilities to do things, and to give them freedom to fail and not prompt them or tell them what to do at all times. And then with that comes the opportunities to show how proud you are. So from very young children, babies, when they start eating, they start going to toilet, all these are opportunities for us as caregivers to make them feel safe. Whether it's writing, academic work, running, walking, and everything is where they get the freedom to fail and freedom to succeed, whatever we may want to tell them how important they are. Like, we give them opportunities when they do household chores, like, okay, this is your job. You will pour water for everyone at the dining table, and then we can't do it without you. Or tell the child that if you're feeling something, if you're feeling angry, not to dismiss the emotions of the child. Like, for example, if a child falls down and cries, and often caregivers would say, oh, you're a big boy, you shouldn't cry, you're a big girl, nothing happened, it's not a problem, come on, get up, nothing happened. This whole phrase about nothing happened is a huge thing for a child. it kind of dismisses their entire emotional process, as if my feelings don't count. I can't even express what I'm feeling. And even if I feel something, I cannot, nobody will understand me. And as you can see from a babyhood, as they enter into teenage, how all these things evolve when adults, as adults, we feel nobody would understand me. What's the point of talking? And that's where, when you're getting abused, you feel afraid of speaking out, because there has been a history of being dismissed as an emotional person. So it's very important that caregivers learn to be okay with their child being whatever, rather than reacting to their misbehaviors, looking at, judging at, evaluating behaviors. They're trying to understand, they're trying to make time, to talk to the child, or see the child, or observe the child, rather than just react and then respond on the basis of what they see at the face value. So there's a lot of emphasis on making time and space for the children to grow, rather than just wearing a caregiver adult hat and saying, I know everything, and if this happens, it means this. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, your ideas, like the suggestion that what we could do to support them is some little things which it seems to me that it is achievable, but the challenge here is in making it consistent so that our child feels secure that they can express themselves to us and all. And Ms. Tanuka, what would be now that you have provided that these are the possible things that we can do? What happens if these are not provided, like the effects of not being able to deliver this?
Yeah. So I will just, kind of say from my clinical experience, the very common behavior manifestations that I see in children is, one is anxiety. And anxiety can take form of that, am I loved? Am I safe in this environment? So it could be that the child will withdraw from certain situations. They will not want to attempt to socialize. It could be withdrawal from regular eating. The sleep can get disturbed. Or there could be excessive clinginess, like attention seeking behavior, what we call, the child is seeking attention excessively, crying a lot. So there is a desperate need to seek affection from the adults, but not knowing how to seek. So it can create a lot of anxiety in the child if they don't feel safe. The other thing that we see is low motivation. So we can call it depression, or we can see it through low motivation. There is absolutely no interest in socializing, or being part of the group, or being at home. There could be declining performance at school, that the student was, as I mentioned before, that the students were attending and was learning fast, and suddenly you see a decline in performance at school, not wanting to go to school. There could be school refusal happening, not because something bad is happening in school, but basically the entire motivation of the child to be part of a community or a group just goes down, because there is always this, what's the point of doing. And as I said, the neurological there are neurological impacts of being in a long-term unsafe environment. So, children can become aggressive, they can self-harm themselves, they can start harming others, they suddenly become, could become like bullies, they can start aggressing other, siblings or, children. And sometimes they can complain of feeling sick, not feeling well, absenteeism, frequent absenteeism through headaches, physical symptoms. So these are some of, there are many other symptoms, of course, but these are some of the very, obvious behavior manifestations that we see in children. So that's how we start, kind of investigating that. How is the child feeling unsafe? Is the child feeling unsafe in some way or the other? And when we talk about students at our center with developmental disabilities, that sense of safety could come from an environment which is like, the temperature is very different, or there's a harshness or a loudness that's going on constantly, maybe a loud TV going on constantly. So it could be at the sensory level also where children can feel unsafe.
That is kind of alarming, something that we would really want to do something about to prevent it. And looking at the community level, Ms. Tracy, what would be the role of the community to safeguard these children?
Thank you, Jill. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Well, Jill, I mean, it's literally everybody's responsibility to participating in the safeguarding of children. You know, it could be the neighbour next door, a family member, a religious leader, anybody within the community, should play a role in protecting children, especially if children go to them for help. You know, it's especially, there's a lot of social norms and cultural implications that may prevent people from speaking out, because they don't want to get involved in another family's matters. But, that children, this can lead to fatality. Children can suffer abuse for years, take this trauma with them through to their adult years. So it's essential that we move past these uncomfortable feelings of not wanting to get involved or not to speak out on behalf of a child. And I think, a lot of what Tanuka has just spoken about is essential, really. It's, putting the child in a position where they're empowered to speak out, even if they feel that they've made a mistake. I mean, we've talked a lot about abuse, in person. We've not really touched on online abuse, which could be traumatic for children, especially, when children are being sexually exploited online. Now, children can be coerced or forced into doing something that they wouldn't normally do online. People post messages online that they wouldn't normally say in person. And then maybe, once that's out, they feel like they've made a big mistake and they're going to let the family down, or they've been bribed into doing something or worse. Now, if that stays within that child, then this abuse can continue for a long period of time. So to even talk to your child, as Tanuka said, it's okay, if you feel you've made a mistake, or if something has happened online that you feel uncomfortable with, then talk to me about it, and set boundaries in terms of, privacy settings, supervision, especially in this region. We have a high domestic staff dependency, and these are people that are not trained to supervise children. They're not nannies, but again, we're putting children at risk when we're giving them free rein online without any privacy settings, any supervision, which can lead them into danger. So all these factors should be considered, and we always want to stay at prevention level. We don't want to be having children in the child protection system in the first place. Here in the UAE, we had a federal law passed in 2016, which many of you may know, which made it mandatory for those who are working directly with children to report any suspicions of abuse. And also, there's an obligation if a child discloses abuse to anybody within the community that they must report it. So, on the government side, we talk about the community. On the government side, we need to have services made available. We need prevention programs, focusing primarily on protecting children from abuse in the first place, which Saji covered. We need to ensure legislation is there, and there was also enforcement of this legislation. All these factors, and also on top of that, with the government, we need to ensure that people are made accountable. So we need systems in place that look at every aspect of the journey of when a child enters the child protection system to when they leave. Has their voice been heard through that system? Are there any gaps in this system? Have we got a social workforce that is bursting at the seams and they've got so many cases that they can't cope with? But then when a child is seriously injured or worse, then is the finger pointed at that social worker, or are we actually looking at a system which is failing that we need to improve on? So all of these layers within the government need to be considered. within a school, within an organisation, if you have any direct work with children. Again, we need to look at policies and procedures, prevention programmes, vetting processes, who is around the child. You know, how can we empower children to be able to speak out in an educational environment or at a sports club? You know, who are we bringing onto a school facility? You know, do we have our own cleaning staff that are cleaning outside of school hours, or are we employing a third-party recruitment company, cleaning company, to be having cleaning staff all over the school grounds in the toilets while children are going to the washroom? Because the school may be trying to create independence in children at a certain age and allow them to go to the washroom on their own, but are we exposing children to potential perpetrators on the school grounds who are not vetted? So there's so many layers to this, really. Even telecommunications companies, you know, how well are we protecting children online? What prevention programs do they have in place? And of course, parents and caregivers themselves, you know, just going back to everything that everyone on the panel has spoken about, you know, having empowered children that are, you know, we're building resilience and stronger children to protect them from abuse, so they know, you know, what measures to take themselves, and they know who to talk to. You know, if they know 5 people on their hand who they can turn to if they can't reach the first one, then at least they speak to somebody. But that somebody needs to be able to be confident enough to report on their behalf.
Right. I so strongly agree with that, Miss Tracy. It's looking at the different roles of each person in the community that we all have to play. Mr. Saji here, who has a vast background in the field of social work, sir, would you like to add with regards to the role of a social worker in protecting these children from any form of abuse?
Yes, hope you can hear me.
Yes.
All right. You know, everyone thinks they can do my job, but nobody wants to. You know, is what one social worker said when she was interviewed about her work, you know. And Tracy spoke a lot about systems, but we also know that no system can function effectively without individuals who can make that system come to life, right? And I think that's where the role of social worker comes to play. So we can talk about systems for, you know, for ages, but if you don't have people who can function effectively, who are motivated, you know, that systems will mean nothing. And I personally find it quite surprising that, you know, we're talking about a time now of social isolation, people being connected by social media, but nobody really, you know, feels connected. There is violence at all settings, you know, peer-to-peer violence in schools, but still the domain of social work hasn't really received the kind of attention it should, right? Because a lot of the social scientists say, you know, in the next 20, 30 years, probably you can even do without doctors, you know, because you can walk into a room and that room can effectively tell you what is wrong with you physically. You know, teachers, I mean, it's almost being, you know, replaced, but not entirely, but a lot of it is online now. But social worker is someone who can never be replaced, probably, and is probably a career of the future, you know, for those who are listening. So there is a critical role that the social worker play, which I think will get increasing attention in the future. But coming to your question, so essentially, we know that they have a preventive, responsive, and promotive role. You know, they have a critical role in preventing violence through promote. And then when violence happens, unfortunately, they are called upon to respond. And then they're also called upon to promote services and programs. For example, parenting, which, you know, many of the panelists spoke about extensively. We know theoretically what to do with children, but, you know, as parents, most of us know in certain situations we do end up behaving, you know, in not so appropriate ways. But then how are we constantly exposed to messages and how do we acquire those skills through which we can interact with children in an appropriate way. So again, going back to the pyramid, so you have the pyramid, and I think at the bottom of the pyramid we are looking at, again, awareness raising, community mobilization, services, and social and behavioral change. Those skills and those attitudes, how do we help ourselves and how do we help those around us to behave appropriately, and social workers have a big role to play. We saw about the second layer of the pyramid, where it's a lot about support systems and connections and community networks. So there again, how can a social worker come into play? Talk about a school setting, probably they have like a peer support group, but how does a social worker probably in the school make sure that those social networks do play a meaningful role, so that if a child experiences something, the child, he or she, can either go to a peer, or he or she knows which are those platforms that they can reach out to. The third layer, again, focus support. I spoke about things like psychological first aid. It can be parenting support, but it can also be, in some settings at least, social and economic support for families. So there is a whole range of things that can happen at the third layer of the pyramid. And then lastly, specialized and rehabilitative services. This is where a lot more investment needs to be done. But at the same time, keeping in mind that it's only 3 to 5% of the cases that will need those services, those specialized, caregivers and social workers. But in the vast majority of cases, social workers have a role to play, but communities themselves can do a lot to prevent, respond, and promote behaviors. So I hope that answers your question, but social work is a career for the future, I suppose.
We appreciate them. We do. I have colleagues here who are social workers. We do appreciate the work that they do. And yeah, moving on, I would like to ask Miss Anita, like we're discussing about the rules around in protecting these children. So what are the role of the Dubai Foundation for Women and Children in promoting child protection?
It was a very valuable insight from Tracy and Sadi on talking about the policies and the structure, the system, the support of the government. So I see Dubai Foundation for Women and Children. We, as the 4 pillars, we call it as the 4 Ps. We work towards protection, we work towards prevention, promoting, and partnerships. So what we aim is to help the society through our services, and all services being free of charge here at this part of the world, I think makes a big difference, especially being an expat here. And basically our services are, as Saji mentioned as well, the case management, Tracy mentioned again, we follow the case management system. So we have the social worker, we have the psychologist. It's a multi-dimensional system approach which we follow. We even have legal consultation and also emergency shelter services for those families or for those children who are at risk while facing any form of abuse or violence. Basically, at the foundation, we do a huge referral system as for now, because as you all know, or you're aware, that every emirate has started its social support services protecting women and children. So we have a helpline which is 24/7, 800 111, and anyone residing in Dubai can always reach out to us, because we believe reaching out, asking for help is one of the most important services one could avail, especially when you are facing any form of violence and abuse, because you're not sure what your rights are. I've always seen callers being very confused and not knowing whether they're doing the right thing by talking to somebody, whether they are talking in support for their rights, not knowing where to go to, not knowing what are the available resources not having understood whether they are going through violence or whether this is an abuse or whether I should be quiet about this. As Tanuka rightly mentioned, emotional safety it's so important. I think not even when you're going through violence or abuse, in general, for any one of us for that matter. So at the foundation, this external services which we provide, other than what we call internal services, where any family displaced or have to flee from their homes in violence, severe violence situation, do approach the police as such to get a referral to come to the foundation and avail temporary shelter services so that we rebuild themselves. Again, the panelists mentioned empowering. It's so important to empower a person who's going through abuse or violence, what I have learned in these 10 years of working directly with victims. And this is only possible if you show them that they have a resource available. So basically what I'm trying to stress here in this wonderful platform today is how important it is to build social networks or networks within yourself, your family, and the community to reach out to ask for help, and to see what is available to protect you and your child or your family. So we basically also have focused on awareness programs because, as all panelists mentioned, it is very important to have this psycho education, especially when we safeguard our children today. Many of us, as policymakers, as educationalists, family members, caregivers, we are still confused as to whether we should report or whether we should not, whether we should ask the child to report. So this is what is so important when you throw light in community awareness programs. The Bai Foundation focuses on community awareness basically during the month of April every year in prevention of child abuse. We reach out to the community at large. We do workshops for schools, for parent communities. We have even programs within the malls here so that you attract the crowd. People are being aware of what abuse is and how important it is. We have parenting workshops for parents on special request. We have workshops for organizations to teach them on how important it is to safeguard children. And we have programs where we reach out to the support staff, not only in schools but in other organizations, who are given the responsibility to safeguard children. And many of the times during these workshops, we get a very positive feedback, because I'm also one of the presenters and I can share this very proudly with you, that people come up and tell us that we didn't know this was abuse, or we didn't know that we could talk about it. We didn't know we could go back and talk to someone and ask for help. So this is so important today, I would like to highlight. And again, we started the bullying program, the anti-bullying program, in whole of UAE, where we targeted schools, focused on kids, teaching them, because we all believe that bullying starts right from home and it gets transferred sometimes to the community schools, and then the community, and the person gets affected at large. So we had anti-bullying programs for students in the schools. We had train the trainer program so that we reach out to the school administration as well. It's not only the teachers who are responsible, it is the school at large and it's the community at large, where we focused on training programs for the parents as well. So this is the social awareness program that we aim every year, and we try to reach out to individuals as well as communities, caregivers, whom we hold as the most responsible people for any child within that environment. And as our panelists mentioned, I would like to echo this once again. It is our social responsibility, individual responsibility, before we could even go back and try to work for others. So it's very important for you as a caregiver, as a social responsible person, to understand your rights before you advocate for children and safeguard them. So it's very also important to know that we have programs which we target for children. We were talking about empowering children, teaching them how to safeguard themselves. So we have designed special programs where we call the program as I am Princess, I am Hero, I am Precious. And we have programs for the adolescent group where we teach them assertiveness, how important it is to stand up, talk for themselves, ask for support, talk about their issues to a trusted person. And in case they do have issues, how they could develop, how they could improve their problem solving, decision making skills. So this, I think, also has created a lot of impact on how we can reach out to children, because mostly after the workshops we have children coming up and giving us suggestions and telling us even, can you have this for our parents please, the workshop, because it's so important. Again, we were talking about communication, and having the right form of communication in any family also gives the child the emotional safety, as Tanuka mentioned very clearly to us. And I think this is something, through these workshops, through these programs, which we talk at large, we are also trying to get the individual be responsible, how he or she, as a child, as a parent, as a teacher, could take help to protect children who are entrusted in our care. So basically, again, we are looking at individual services where they can even call up the foundation on our 24/7 helpline and ask for support with regard to their doubts, or probably going through an abuse, or again, we were talking about domestic violence. Even talking to somebody as a professional would help them give a wider perspective, more focused, solution focused perspective, to help them move on in life, whatever the issue is, whether it is a abuse, or maybe it's just an accommodation that they require, or maybe they need to improve their resilience skills, I would say. But just talking to somebody can, believe me, can change your whole perspective and find the right support, Jill.
Wow, it's really great to know that there are a lot of ways that we could support these children in general, and specifically in ensuring their emotional safety. As you have included some programs in relation to that.
I would
And
also like to, sorry
yeah,
to interrupt you, but
sure,
just
sure.
one major point to add on, as Tracy mentioned, that we have the government support system. So since of late, we are a source of referral, as I mentioned. We have all the Emirates having their own social services department. And recently, we have the Community Development Authority with the Child Protection Helpline 800-988, which we also use as a referral system if someone approaches us in need for child protection policy, or safeguarding children, or witnessing abuse, or trying to report domestic violence or child abuse, or a child being in threat. And we form a source of referral to the other Emirates as well. So we don't leave the caller unattended. Ras Al Khaimah has Aman shelter services and support system for women and children. We have Dar Khalifa at Al Qaim. Again, it's a shelter for women and children. We have the Dubai Police Human Rights Department, which has a women and child protection department where you can approach them for your needs. We have the Sharjah Social Support Services and the Child Helpline, where you can approach them for those residing in Sharjah. And above all, again, the Ministry of Interior in Abu Dhabi, where we also do certain referrals for very severe cases of violence. So I think it's so important for us professionals to spread this message and let the community know that there is help available, resources available, and it is we who need to stand up and take this support system forward.
Thank you, Miss Anita. Well, that's a whole lot of information that you all had given us now. At this point, let us see if there are some questions in the chat. We could discuss a few based on the availability of the time. We had talked a lot of things, and we didn't notice that we had already completed like our first hour. So let's see here. Actually, we also have some pre-registered questions. If I have to ask, I think maybe Miss Anita could answer this. This is regarding one, like she had shared that she has a son who is 16 years old, a person of determination. And she had asked on how can we protect our child in our absence, like later on in life when they would have to leave. So how can how can they protect their child
It's a
without
very
doubt them.
Thank you for that question, and it's a very difficult answer. I'm sure Tanuka will agree with me because most of parents or caregivers who have children with special needs always have this fear. Again, it's an emotional insecurity, it's an emotional factor involved here, and Tanuka rightly put in that it starts right from the child or right from the time the parent conceives the child, and this is something which grows with the child, with the parent, with the family. So what I would like to be specifically answering here as per my outlook would be that it's so important for us to build a network of emotional support and security as much as possible right from the time you know that your child has special needs and your child has a determination, a challenge or a determination context in his or her life. Now, this is important because you never know what kind of support is available from the family side or from your community side. So, as a parent, I think it's very important to start focusing not at the end of your journey or after you feel that you've reached a standstill or stagnation point. But I would request the parent to start looking for options where she or he can build a safety wall around this child with the help of other people within the family or the given resources within their community or back in their home country if they are not residing in their second home country. So it is, I would like to say, Jill, that this parent would definitely have to start thinking right now, not in an anxious frame of mind, but looking at the resources, looking at the family support that can avail at this point of thought, and trying to figure out the safety and security issues that she could face when she's trying to keep her child safe and entrust the child in someone's care or the given resources. I'm sure Tanuka will agree with me that this cannot be achieved in a day or two. It is a long process during this journey with your child. So it's good enough if you start thinking about it right now from all aspects of emotional security and safety.
I do agree as well. It is really appreciated that at least in this time they are really thinking about what can what can their child do when they are not there anymore. So it's a good thing that they have this thought process on so that they could be able to plan
Yes.
ahead. Here, I'm not sure if Mr. Saji or Miss Anita could answer this query. It is regarding the relation of the child abuse, how the pandemic had affected it. Is there any correlation to that?
You want me to answer, Jill, or Sajid to answer?
Any one of you, actually. Do you have thoughts on it, Mr. Saji?
Yeah, I'm sure Anita can come in, but yes, so obviously there is a lot of evidence that the pandemic has had an impact on, what happens in terms of violence against children. But you don't need again a lot of in-depth analysis to know why, because as it is, a lot of the violence against children happen at home, right? I mean, even studies from UAE has shown us that a lot of violence at home, I'm sorry, violence against children happens at home, and it's also by people around them, caregivers very often, parents, immediate relations. So when that was the case even before the pandemic. Now with social isolation, very little movements, people being stuck at home, their vulnerability to abuse only goes manifold. I mean, it increases manifold. So absolutely, there is an impact, and data from around the world is also showing us that. Anita, some of you referred to child helplines. Many of the child helplines have been receiving increasing calls after the pandemic set in. But maybe over to Anita and others.
Miss Anita, yeah.
Thank you, Saji. Yes, I fully agree with Saji in this because during the pandemic, we have faced a lot of callers calling up. Maybe it could be the parent calling up, or we had children directly calling up saying, and while talking about the risk factors I mentioned, it's again the family environment. And I found space during this time, which we usually talk of as one of the risk factors, the space within a home environment, everyone having their own space. And this is one of the risks which is in child abuse factor, risk factor when we talk about. But during the pandemic, we saw that this space, the boundaries which the children had were very limited, or the parent had was very limited, because everybody was in this culture working from home. And many of the children, we've seen that they've reported that they've been using the same laptop which is monitored by the parents. We had school counselors calling us up asking what is to be done, because we are sure that the child is going through some sort of abuse, but it's very sensitive to ask in front of the parent. So children were finding it very difficult. And what we also observed is, while the child was at school, they always had a second parenting figure, their teacher or the counselor whom they could talk to. They had their peers whom they could take support. So when they were confined to be within the four walls, I found most of them getting very frustrated, and for the simple fact that they didn't know they could even talk about it to someone with safety, because every time people were around them, this is what some of the kids said. And this was more seen during the adolescent category, I would say. So they had lost their freedom, and this was again frustrating to many of them, where they went into self harm, or probably they tried other self gratifying strategies. And again, most of them used to get into trouble with their parents, because they had to give justifications for this, which was happening at home. So we did face a lot of issues, but we provided them support whenever possible, as well as to the parent, as to how to manage the other caregiver or the other caregivers at home, or could be other extended family members, which was also one of the reasons why children were getting frustrated, I felt. There was a huge impact, but I guess everybody started improving their resilience skills, and most of them could overcome that.
Thank you, Miss Anita. I think we'll have to answer one more question before we wrap up. I think this would go to Miss Tanuka. Does nurturing affect self-confidence and independence of the child by any means? In that case, is there any limitation for nurturing in terms of age?
Yeah, thank you, Jill. I saw that question. So we have to define nurturing, and in terms of different age would require different kinds of nurturing. So if we are looking at again the emotional safety part, which we spoke about, there is a core bonding that needs to be there between the child and the caregiver, child and the parent, child and the teacher. So that bonding has to be nurtured. So when a baby is born, it's an infant, the only nurturing we are looking at is the physical nurturing. So the physical environment. And as they evolve from 2 years, we know the children at 2 years, they start exploring the environment, they start saying no. So when they start becoming a little bit more confident about exploring the environment, because they start walking, and that's why 2 year is known as terrible twos, because they start saying no, they start rebelling against parents. So the question is, can we nurture the rebelliousness in the child, or do we immediately clamp down and say, discipline them and say, no, you can't do it? So it is very important to define what nurturing is, because every human individual, every child, will come with a pre-packaged way of processing the environment, and that's the human way of processing. But being an adult or a caregiver or a disciplinarian, how are we perceiving that, and what do we need to nurture? When the child needs comfort, when they're hurt or sick, that is nurturing by giving comfort. When they need their own freedom, we have to nurture that sense of freedom. When they need to make choice, when they want to do things on their own and they are not allowed the opportunity because we are scared something bad will happen, Even, parents are doing it with good intention, but we are actually kind of curbing the sense of freedom. So are we nurturing the sense of freedom? So I would look at nurturing based on the needs of each age level. So yes, nurturing is required, but not the same way that we think nurturing is, which is like a lot of hugs and kisses, probably. So what do we mean by it? So it's very crucial that what Anita mentioned and others mentioned, that to educate ourselves in how to parent by knowing what are the needs, emotional and social needs of the child at each age level, and then kind of give them that scope to develop themselves, because human beings have a natural ability to develop themselves. We as caregivers will just have to provide the platform so that it flourishes, it is nurtured. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tanuka. Okay, now we're getting close to the end of our time together. It's unfortunate that we won't be able to discuss all of the questions. I think at this point, I'd like to cap this session by asking each of our panelists, like, if there's one thing that you would like this audience to take away from this session, what would it be? I would like to start off with Ms. Tracy.
Can it only be one, Jill?
You can have
Okay.
two.
Maybe three. So I was going to say, if a child is telling you someone is harming them, it's because they want it to stop. So believe in them, tell them that they're not responsible. And if you suspect something, speak out. It might be their only chance. And if you need to, you can report it anonymously, but ensure that you do something about it. That's my closing words, really. Thank you.
Thank you. Beautiful. Thank you, Miss Tracy. We move on to Miss Anita.
I think my take home message would be that, we need to provide constantly unconditional love, respect, and understanding towards our kids. And the most important of all, we shouldn't be judging them, rather than we should try to listen to them, lend a helping hand to most of these kids who really look forward to support whenever they require. So basically, trusting them and helping them learn what trust is the most important role of a caregiver or a parent or anyone for that matter who are dealing with children on a daily basis.
Strongly agree to that. Thank you, Miss Anita. Over to you, Miss Tanuka.
So my take-home message will be to caregivers and parents that do not normalize violence, which means to look at our parenting and where we are forcing our expectations while bringing them up. And that is a subtle form of violence which children get used to, which makes them tolerant of other kinds of violence, where they are not able to discriminate, the hierarchy of abuse. So yes, we all have good intentions to help our children to grow, but we have to be very mindful as to whether we are pushing our expectations on them. We are trying to change them. We are trying to make them feel that they are not enough. So we are forcing that, because to me, as a psychologist, that's a form of violence. When we are, not giving them choice and forcing our wishes on them, and telling them that what you are right now is not good enough, you need to do more. So these are subtle messages that we need to be really, really careful to prevent further abuse, at a greater intensity, because children need to know what is safe and what is unsafe. If they do not know in their home environment, even at the subtler level, then it becomes very difficult for them to, kind of identify that, am I being abused or not? So that would be my take-home message, that let's look and review the way we interact with our children.
Right. Thank you, Ms. Tanuka. Over to you, Mr. Saji.
Yes, thank you, Jill. One takeaway, and I'm probably responding to Francisca and Victor in the chat box. I mean, the questions they raised.
That's great.
There is, Francisca asked, child protection is a fail where you can go to jail without committing any crime. And I think she is referring to this whole tendency to sometimes over-regulate, right? Because suddenly, everything gets regulated, and then anything that you do can be, picked up by enforcement authorities. And I think that's where I think all of us need a bit more patience. Child protection as a field can sometimes go wrong and be over-regulated, but by and large, I think the domain of child protection deals with this question of where do we draw a balance between, to what extent can we control, how do we engage, and then when does enforcement come in? So I think all of us need a bit more patience, even in the field of child protection. And that is related to the question that Victor raised. What do I do with half my children being hyperactive? I was a teacher for 1 year, Victor, and I left it. You know why? But just to say that, again, it's a question of capacities, it's a question of channeling children's energies. But I think this is where the whole field of child protection and beyond looks at how do children, adults interact with each other? Where do we draw the line? We don't have answers right now, but it's a field which is constantly evolving. So all of us all of us will end up gaining a lot by being part of this process. But I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Mr. Saji. Well, I guess as for me as well, I feel that each of us, it's really very important to internalize all the things that you have shared with us now, and to be conscious of our actions. Like it's not that you have to think, I don't know about this, or I'm not aware. Now we are trying to be conscious of our actions, having an understanding on how it really impacts the emotional growth and development. And as we had also discussed earlier, each of us has our role to play. And now it becomes also our responsibility to be the voice of those children and to watch out for those red flags. And most importantly, later on, eventually to empower them to protect themselves. Very importantly. So thank you so much. I have really learned a lot from this discussion. I'm so glad for being here with all of you today. And well, yeah, that's a wrap. I really appreciate all the panelists. Thank you so much for spending your time with us here. Thank you so much, Miss Tracy, Miss Anita, Miss Tanuka, Mr. Saji. This is such an insightful and informative session. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank our audience for their participation. The kind words in the chat, thank you so much. Unfortunately, some of your questions were not able to discuss due to the limitation of the time. But let's see how to go about it. And yeah, I'm sure that like me, you will be leaving this session with a better understanding and awareness. Okay? So before you leave this platform, please fill in the feedback form in the chat box. Yeah. And well, in behalf of Al Noor Rehabilitation and Welfare Association for People of Determination, I thank you all once again. And we hope that when the situation gets better, we would be able to meet physically. And yeah, but for now, I wish everyone the best of health. And together, we will surpass this crisis that we are facing. Yeah. Good afternoon and stay safe, everyone. Bye bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Jill. Thanks,
Thank you
Anna.
so
Thank you
much.
so
Thank
much.
Thanks,
you.
everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jill, can we take leave or do you want us to still remain?
Hi, Jill. We can't hear.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, you can take a leave. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Jill. Tanuka, thank you.
Thanks,
Nice seeing
Tanuka.
you after a long time. I
Same.
sometimes felt I was part of Alnur family when I used to come often for the
Of course.
sessions there.
You are.
But
Always are. Always
thank you
are.
so much. And I really feel connected